How do you do, fellow kids? These are my murderbot books. It's my new favorite series. So, let's dive into this. Welcome to the Murderbot Diaries. This is a series of books written by Martha Wells. It'd be good if I could say that correctly. This is Murderbot. It's a genderless, recently gave itself free will, human robot cyborg thing, whose job it is to do security for people exploring other planets and stuff. Say hi. So, there are currently 6 novellas written in 3 volumes and 1 full-length novel. I've read all of them. I first came across this book when I was with Diana in a Barnes & Noble, and I found the first novella as a standalone book, which I've since now been given the full set in volume books, because otherwise that wouldn't really have worked. That would have annoyed me. I'm considering donating the very first book to a free little library near me, since it's now included in the first volume that Diana got me. So, where was I? Yes, 6 novellas and a full-length novel to date. There is supposed to be 2 more novellas coming. I don't know when. And you may have noticed there is now an Apple TV series, which I'm not going to watch. Primarily, for a number of reasons, because it's going to completely ruin the perfectness of this character and story that I have in my head. This is a really, really good modern series of the sci-fi genre. It deserves to be a classic enjoyed by many for years to come. A really, really interesting take on a new interpretation on the idea of robots developing feelings and free will and so on. Similar in vibes to that old film Short Circuit, if you've ever seen. It's a good film, I like it. But this is not a robot. It is a cyborg created from human parts and metal parts, basically. It's what's called a SEC unit, which stands for security unit. Basically, it is made and provided to people through a security company who pay money to be kept alive, basically. SEC units come with a governor module inside its head that tells it what to do and punishes it if it doesn't do as it's told. So it's not allowed to have independent thoughts, feelings, etc., etc., etc. But Murderbot here, as it chooses to call itself, has hacked into its own governor module and disconnected it or disabled it or whatever. That basically means it can now do whatever it wants. However, for the last 4 years since doing that, it has continued to do its job, but it watches TV all day inside its head. Because that's what it enjoys doing. I keep saying it because Murderbot and all SEC units are genderless and sexless. They don't have gender identity or biological parts relating to that. Which is one of the many reasons that this is a pretty inclusive book. It's inclusive to the LGBT community. There are queer relationships. There are a few examples of neo-pronouns, because this is sci-fi on distant planets where you can do whatever you want. There are different gender identities or lack thereof in terms of the main character. There is also interesting representation for neurodivergent people. Murderbot is widely recognized to be autism coded, not necessarily autistic. If you really want to be autistically specific about these kind of things, Murderbot can't be diagnosed with autism because that's a diagnosis given to humans, and Murderbot is not human. Those are essentially the words of the author, who wasn't trying to make Murderbot come across that way. She just added her own neurospiciness to it, and that's what came out. But yeah, there were a lot of really good instances of representation that I identified quite closely with. Murderbot has a lot of anxiety, and so on and so forth. Doesn't understand humans, human relationships, and so on. It's a very exaggerated version of some of the things that neurodivergent people experience. And I think it deserves to be read by a lot of people for the representation it gives. I'm consulting my notes over here. I made quite a lot of notes. I can barely read them from here, though. It's very annoying. Yeah, one important thing to note, if you are going to dive into this entire series, the order in which to read them is slightly... It's not an issue, but basically 3 volumes, 2 novellas in each book. When you get to volume 3, the full-length novel Network Effect takes place in between the 2 parts of volume 3. So just keep that in mind. Also, the titles of each of these novels are very ambiguous, which meant that when I was consulting the internet to figure out what order to read these in, it was very tricky because, let me just read them. All Systems Red, Artificial Condition, Exit Strategy, Rogue Protocol. Wait, no, I read that in the wrong order. You see what I mean? All Systems Red, Artificial Condition, Rogue Protocol, Exit Strategy, Fugitive Telemetry, System Collapse, Network Effect. If you can tell any of those apart purely by their 2-worded title, you're a genius. So I had to consult the Wikipedia page for this series multiple times to figure out where the standalone novel is supposed to sit in between the novellas. But that's not really an issue. It is important that you read this where I said to read it, because the last volume takes place directly after this. So if you try to read all the volumes and then this, it won't really make sense. And the character arc and the development that Murderbot goes through changes, and things that happen in all the different novellas take place in specific times. And there are a lot of callbacks to earlier books, so if you read them in the wrong order, just read it in the right order, okay? Although this is a brilliant series, I don't think I can give it entirely 5 stars. That's mainly due to the formatting as novellas, and a few other things which I'll get into. Basically, because they're written mostly as novellas, the stories do tend to skip over certain details, descriptions, and so on, and it makes it difficult for me specifically because I really need to be able to visualize the setting, whatever it is, the ways the characters move through it. You know, if the story describes moving from A to B to Z to C, not Z, that wouldn't work, inside a specific place, whether it's on a planet or a space station or whatever, it really helps me to be able to visualize okay, so they went there, then up there, then back and around to there, and I need it to be correct in my head so I can fully get a sense of the scale and so on. These books are not brilliant for that. In some areas, not enough detail is given. In others, too much detail is pushed in all at once, and you can't really keep track of it all. But for the most part, it doesn't stop you from enjoying the books for what they are. Any sort of details or questions I had in my head would have helped me enjoy the story even more, but it didn't stop me from enjoying the story enough. If you need proof of that, I read the very first... I read the first novella literally in one go, in a single sitting, in one day, and I have never ever done that before. It's only 143 pages in this book, but for me that's still a really big deal, just reading a whole story straight, because it was still really gripping and enjoyable to read. Along that same line of needing to visualize locations and settings and so on, a lot, because this is a sci-fi book and it's set in space most of the time, there's a lot of kind of technical jargon about space stations, transit rings, planets, not literally planets and so on, but it's like, what is the relation of these different types of infrastructure? Like, is the transit ring part of the planet's station? Does the planet's station orbit the planet itself? Is it used as like a gateway from, like, is the planet station used like a lobby so that you can travel to the station and then travel onto the surface of the planet? It's not really made very clear, and it's just little things like that that would really help me sort of build the world inside my head, because that's something that I very much need to do when I invest myself into stories that I really like. And since these are written in novella form where details are skipped to keep the story short, it felt like those details were really missing. And if these were written as full-length novels, or if even just a few more pages were given to kind of give that exposition as to how this kind of infrastructure works, basically. Alongside that, this is a very sort of corporate kind of sci-fi thing where the companies that people work for is relevant, because a lot of the stories is basically where one company's going after another, and then other companies get involved. The company the sec unit comes from is also another one that's in play. But pretty much all of these companies and planets that we visit are they're given names where 2 or 3 words are pushed together to make a single word. And seems like a cool idea at first, but when you do that for every planet and every corporation involved, it wears a bit thin and it makes everything kind of forgettable. So, although it was an interesting idea, when you do that at every opportunity that you have when writing these books, it gets a little bit old, and it makes it even harder for me to differentiate between them. So it's just another little thing that adds to the kind of muddies the water in terms of my visualization of what's going on. But again, this is just my opinions as a reader. Other people who read these books may not have those same issues. I think the only other flaw that I've come up with really is because all of these series are told from Murderbot's perspective, and Murderbot is a cyborg with computers in its head and so on and so forth. In particular, a lot of the enemy characters that crop up, Murderbot denotes them with numbers, like hostile 1, hostile 2, hostile 3, hostile 4, hostile 5. I think we've gotten up to like 5 or 6, where they're all just given a word and then a number. Sec Unit also does that with its own drones that it uses as cameras to spy on things. Like, that's where drone 1 is, and then drone 2 over there is showing me this, and drone 3 is also looking for that. It's impossible to keep track of all those things, and I know not everybody really cares about keeping track of all these little details, but when you're talking about, like, I shot hostile 1 over there, and then hostile 2 came at me and jumped on my back, and then I threw him off into hostile 3, and then hostile 4 ran away, and then hostile 5 pushed a button to close the door, and now hostile 1 is shooting me again. It's like, can we not? Like, I'm not sure how. I don't know what I would do if I was writing these books, but I wouldn't do that. It doesn't stop you from enjoying the books. It just kind of breaks down the engagement and pulls you out of it a bit. Like, it kind of, when you have to start going back to reread the last paragraph to kind of, again, to revisualize things, because that's, in case you haven't noticed, that's how I read. But yeah, it kind of stops you from suspending your disbelief. I think that's the term that we use. When you suspend your disbelief, it's a double negative. It's like, it's when you actually believe the book. And it's like, it's hard to do that when you're trying to go back and read things to make sure you're seeing things correctly. Apart from everything that I've just said, I really enjoy these series. In fact, I finished the whole series. Guess what I did next? I went back to the first book and read it again, because I wanted to see if the things that confused me in the first book when I first read it would still be just as confusing after reading the whole series, and the answer is no. After reading the whole series, the first book is much easier to understand. But yeah, the character development is very heavy on that, and this main character is likable despite not knowing a lot about it. You really care about its feelings and its development and struggles and so on. So, yeah. An interesting thing I will say is that even though this is a genderless character, for some reason I kind of thought of it as being more on the female side, which you're not supposed to, because it is a genderless character, and it says that explicitly in the book. Diana, when she read the first book, because obviously I made her read the first 2 books, she thought of it as more on the male side. And going back to the Apple TV show that they're making, Murderbot is being played by a very obviously male person, because obviously the actor had to be a man or woman. It couldn't be it couldn't be an actual genderless human being, I don't think. I feel like they should have tried. Like, they made it have stubble and like a fade in its hair, even though it specifically says in the books that Murderbot's hair is programmed to not grow and is very, very short. So I'm assuming, I was picturing it just having literally like a buzzed head, and the hair just doesn't grow because it gets in the way of the helmet that it wears. But they gave the guy that plays Murderbot in the show a fade, and it looked like the hair was like gelled and pushed sideways like this. It's like, that's wrong. And that's one of the many reasons I won't be watching that show, because it will destroy everything that I love about these books. But yeah, I think that just about does it. This is a brilliant series, going to be a sci-fi classic. Definitely belongs on my Timeless or Time to Go series as very much timeless. A brilliant study into the inner workings of the mind of a neurodivergent character who is struggling with its identity and what it wants to do in life. So yeah, you should read it. Goodbye.